Good morning. Glad you're all here today. How I get my voice. It's time to begin. Glad you all are in a good mood. We're getting started here in the Gospel of Luke. Everybody has a workbook. If you need a workbook, I've got extras. We're on page 12, lesson 3, in that neighborhood at least today. I've not been here long, but I've been here long enough that people have started to ask me, sort of making sure I don't have second thoughts. I haven't had any until this morning when I opened my garage door up and I felt 18 degrees. I thought, boy, I wish I was in Texas. That was a long time ago. When I moved to Texas, my blood thinned, and these cold weather, cold temperatures. But it's supposed to be back to the 60s here in a couple of days, so looking forward to that. Yeah, pre-summer. Yeah, bring it on. Bring it on. Well, on Wednesday night, we were let me back up about the book. The book gives a good summary. There's so much material in Luke, as you know, that the book basically just gives you a summary of each of the paragraphs in the text, and which is helpful if you want to read through that. We may or may not get to questions. We don't have time to go through all of these questions, but what I don't want you to forget to do, this is the important part really, it's good to know what the text says to understand what's being presented. But you need to ask yourself, as you read, why does Luke want Theophilus to know this? If we want to try to get a sense of purpose, why is this being written? This is written to Theophilus, and we kind of talked a little bit about that in the introduction last week. But why does Luke think that this story is important to know? And what's being conveyed to us about Jesus? So the book doesn't do so much of that because it's just summarizing the text. You get into a little of that with the question, but again, in a book like this where there's so much material, sometimes we can forget to ask that question. So on Wednesday we got into a little bit about the birth announcements, this pre-ministry part, the opening 3 chapters, kind of in the middle of all of that this morning. But we began by looking at the birth announcements of John and Jesus, and noticing how John sets how Luke sets all of this up. And there's some difference in reactions. Gabriel goes to both Zechariah and to Mary and tells them about this child. And with Zechariah, this child that Elizabeth is going to have, we said, you read through that text and you think, well, this sounds like we've been here before. You have an older couple who can't have children, but an angel comes and says, well, you're going to have a child. And it takes you back to things very similar with Abraham and Sarah. And while God is doing a new thing, that's what the Old Testament tells us in Isaiah that we studied last quarter. That with the Messiah, God's going to do a new thing for the world, and He's going to begin to do this new thing with some familiarity. So He's building on a lot of groundwork that has already been laid. we did notice, though, there's difference in reaction that Zechariah and Mary have to the news of the children that are going to be born. Zechariah seems to want proof. He wants proof. And again, that seems to be reasonable, understandable. Gabriel responds to him in a way that conveys that Zechariah lacks faith. He uses the word unbelief there. And it seems that Zechariah wants proof, whereas Mary, her questions are about additional information. And Mary's response to all of this is, she is the servant of the Lord. Whatever is going to happen, she is completely accepting of. And this gets into, what John, or what I keep saying John, what Luke is trying to show us. There are some characters that we're introduced to. We're introduced to Zechariah and to Mary. And they're encountering this angel who's telling them about the purposes of God. And they react. And so it is with us, right? We learn about the purposes of God in our world, in our lives, and we react. And sometimes we're like Zechariah in how we react. We just can't believe it. Other times we might react like Mary does, and we're very open and receptive to what God wants for us in our lives. So that's just a little bit about where we were with these announcements of the birth of John and Jesus. And then there's these two songs that are recorded in the text. I guess that was a pun. Sorry. But silence breaks. Silence breaks in a very big way. On the small scale, you think of, well, Zechariah, the sign that he was given was, well, you're going to be mute. You can't talk. And so during this pregnancy, he's unable to speak. Well, eventually he's able to speak. And this song is laid down. Mary's song is given in 46 to 55. And it's in terms of the structure, it's interesting. You're given parallel stories, right, with Zechariah and Mary, and here it is again with these two songs. With Mary's song, she's emphasizing how God rules. God rules, and God exalts the humble, which is a key theme of Luke. He said that Luke is showing how Jesus is going to exalt the humble. Jesus is looking for the marginalized. And that comes out in this song. That's certainly in keeping with Mary's experiences. What's a young girl in that ancient context? I mean, she is a nobody. She is a nobody. But yet she is the one that God chooses to exalt. And we can see why she was chosen in that humble reaction. She sees herself as a servant of the Lord. Zechariah's song is wrapped up with prophecy. He makes this point about how God is faithful, and this is where with Zechariah you have this silence breaking, that God has been quiet for hundreds of years now. And now he speaks. And he's picking up where he left off. What Zechariah indicates is that God is being faithful to the promises that he made way back with Abraham. And what's about to happen within his lifetime are the fulfillment of those things. So a new day is dawning. It's just the way he describes that. Now, what does that day mean? Wait and see. We're going to keep. You have to keep reading. But we're at the beginning of a new era, a very special time, and they're going to see, Mary especially is going to see some great things happen. Things that are surprising, unexpected, and well, even painful, as we'll notice here in just a minute. So we finished up on Wednesday looking at the birth and early life of Jesus. We mainly talked about his birth, and it's described in very, very humble terms, as everyone is familiar with in the opening 7 verses of chapter 2. And there we have the presence of angels and shepherds, and we talked about how the angels, it talks about a heavenly host, and so often we think of the angels were sort of the choir, and that might have been the case, but it's much more than that. The word host means armies, and what do you need a heavenly army for? Well, if you put this in the proper context, it's just in the broadest framework of what's been going on for a very long time in terms of spiritual warfare. We could understand the presence of a heavenly army there protecting this child that has been born and the things that are starting to come to pass. Jesus, is hinted at by Zechariah. This child is the fulfillment of everything that God has been trying to do to save humans. That takes us back to Genesis 3. Now, Zechariah doesn't say that, but that's what we're working with, and we're going to see how that's going to come about, and we'll pick up on that as we go along. So we've got a considerable amount of information here at the beginning dealing with the birth of Jesus, and then moving forward in time, there's just not much. We have this first of really 2 windows into this period in his life. This first being that Jesus being dedicated at the temple, and there's some important things that happen there. And then the other instance, of course, has to do with him when he was 12 years old. But I suppose we all would have liked to have had more information about his childhood. There's lots of different theories and speculations about his childhood. There are other writings that you can read about that were written centuries after him that record allegedly some childhood stories, and if you take a deep dive into how the Bible came into the form that we've got it, real dry topics like canonicity, you might come across some of those infancy narratives, and they're interesting. Some of them are even comical if you read them, and they're not long. They don't read like the Gospels. They're very, very different. I mean, you don't need to know much about the canonicity to recognize if you just read some of these infancy childhood narratives that they just don't read like Matthew, Mark, Luke, and John. But anyhow, they are out there, and every now and again, someone will bring up some of those lost Gospels, as they're usually referred to. But anyhow, here we have Jesus being taken to the temple to be dedicated, as was required by the law, beginning here in verses 22 through 40. Does anything stand out to you about this encounter? Of all of the pieces of Jesus' birth and his early days, this is probably the least considered. You've heard much more teaching about Jesus getting lost than you have this event. So they go to, and they're going to offer sacrifices. So what kind of sacrifices do Joseph and Mary use? Okay, a 4-man sacrifice, right? That's important, and that's in keeping with the lowly status of the Son of God. He's not born into means. He's not born into wealth or to power, and that's stressed to us. Again, that's an important detail, and readers. Early readers probably would have picked up on that. Now we know that this was written by a Gentile to a Gentile, but it's an important detail, again, just giving us some indication of his status. So, who are the two characters that we're introduced to in this text, this part? Simeon and Anna. Tell me about Simeon. We can't.
Other than he was devout and righteous.
Okay. He was devout and righteous. And I suppose if that's all anybody ever knows about us, that's a good thing, right? That he was devout and righteous. What's he doing?
He said he's looking for consolation of Israel, and the Holy Spirit was upon him.
Okay. He's looking for the consolation of Israel. The Spirit is upon him. In many ways, I think Simeon is a good representation of the Jews of this era. I said earlier that the Jews were very aware that they were living in a story that had yet to be finished. And so Simeon is looking for, how's this going to get finished? And, when you read the Old Testament, when you get to the end of it, you would be kind of disappointed, right? If you paid money to see that movie, it would not be an ending you'd like, because where's the rest of it? Sequel, I guess. But he's just waiting. That's the hope of the Jews, right? Is that, well, these promises that have been made are going to be kept. How are they going to be kept? They didn't know. They didn't know that they had ideas. They had ideas about things, but they don't know. They couldn't have told you what Luke writes about in these first 3 chapters. They didn't have any idea about that. What about Anna?
She was a widow.
She's a widow? 84 years old? We probably know even less about her than Simeon. Although the kind of woman that Anna was is in keeping with the kind of people Luke writes about. Why bother? Why bother writing anything about this woman? But he does. He draws in on her, and I suppose much like Simeon, these two, this man and this woman, they represent the kind of person, kind of people that God is looking for, the kind of people that God uses, and their reactions to this infant, this child, are significant. So in verses 29 to 32, we have Simeon's reaction. Lord, now you are letting your servant depart in peace, according to your word. For my eyes have seen your salvation that you have prepared in the presence of all peoples, a light for revelation to the Gentiles and for glory to your people Israel. That's incredible. That's an incredible thing that this man says. It gives us tremendous insight to his understanding, tremendous insight into his heart. Lord, you are now letting your servant depart in peace. What does that tell us about Simeon?
Well, it said he would not taste death until he had seen the Lord's Christ. In other words, that part of my life is over. I've met Christ. So, moving forward, I can depart in peace.
Yeah. That's kind of a big deal, isn't it? This is what we all want. This is what we all want. We want to be able to lead this world in peace. Now, how are we going to do that? How are we going to find peace in death? In who this child was. And who this child was going to become. And how God was going to use him. The consolation of Israel, that's an interesting name. The consolation of Israel. What's consolation? Comfort. In what context do we ever use the word consolation?
Comfort in the face of loss.
Comfort in the face of loss. Okay. Is there any other context in which that word is used? Don't think too deeply.
Consolation game.
Okay, the consolation game, exactly. Consolation game, the consolation prize. It's well, you've lost, but something to ease that pain. You know, you could have this. That's not entirely what is conveyed here, but I think in terms of Simeon, that's what you have. Simeon's not going to live to see what's going to happen. In many ways, he's like all of the prophets who came before him. So what's his consolation? His consolation is knowing that this Jesus is going to do for him everything that he needs. And that's enough. He doesn't need to know the rest of the story. So there's a man who has tremendous faith in God and what God was going to do with him.
The significance of Simeon being Jewish, that's also, I think, a significant piece of the puzzle too, right?
Yeah. That's a significant piece of the puzzle. And in both of these reactions, you see where there's a coming together of the Jews and the rest of the world. What he says here, the rest of what he says, is really about the implication of Jesus for the Gentiles, which is interesting. He refers to this child as the salvation that you have prepared in the presence of all peoples. Anytime you see that word peoples in the Bible, it is a reference to the Gentiles, to the nations. You know, that word, that term is used especially in the Old Testament. So that's how Simeon understands the implication here of him. A light for the revelation to the Gentiles. A light. You know, we associate light with Jesus, and that becomes clearer the further along we go. But he's making this point that he's a light to the Gentiles. Now, who prophesied that the Messiah would be a light to the Gentiles, a light to the nations? It's an easy question. Last quarter. Isaiah. All right, very good. There you go. Isaiah. Now, Isaiah is the one who does that. And you know, it's all wrapped up here in this just very brief reaction that Simeon has. And for the glory of your people Israel. So it's well, Paul would later say to the Jews first and also to the Gentiles. Brian?
David, is Simeon possibly, was implied here he might be a prophet? Because it says, you know, that he was moved by the Spirit, and then it had been revealed to him, verse 26, by the Holy Spirit, that he would not die before he saw this. I was wondering if he had direct revelation.
Sure. We might not describe him that way. That's how he's used.
Yeah.
It seems like that's how he's used. Yeah.
I just looked it up, and the name Simeon actually means, the original Hebrew means God has heard. So it sounds like if Simeon was a guy that was righteous, was looking for this. Like that's why he was kind of selected. If it fits with his name at least, and kind of fits.
Yeah, and we know names are always important. Yeah. Anna, in verse 38, says, "In coming up the very hour, she began to give thanks to God and to speak of Him to all who were waiting for the redemption of Jerusalem. So what image do you have of Anna?
Well, it does say she was a prophet.
It does. What do you think of what's stated here in verse 38? Just your reactions to her. Not only was she a prophet, as I'd say, she was an evangelist. I mean, isn't she declaring the gospel? In so many words here, she's telling others that she worships and gives thanks to God, and makes the point that she is the redemption. Describes Jesus as the redemption of Jerusalem. That that's what she was waiting for. And so, the idea of redemption is found throughout the scriptures. It has to do with buying slaves, purchasing the freedom of a slave, and that would happen in the ancient world. The slaves often might have been soldiers who had been captured in war, but the idea of redemption is you're granting someone's freedom, and that meant something to Israel because that had happened in their past, right? That's what the Exodus was all about. The Exodus, understanding the Exodus is critical, cannot be overstated in terms of understanding what Jesus is about to do. The Exodus is in the background of all of it. The Exodus as happened in the past, in their history. And those were events that actually happened, and they would commemorate the Exodus when? Passover. All right, you say it like you've got confidence. It's okay. They commemorated that at Passover, and so all of that again. Yes, it's a commemoration of what God did in the past, but the Exodus is a sign. It's a sign, and signs they point, right? They point in a direction. What God did there with Israel is a sign for what He's going to do for the world. And so the Exodus is in the background of a lot of what you read in the Gospels. Jesus being baptized and then going into the wilderness and then beginning a ministry. That sounds like the Exodus, right? That sounds like crossing the Red Sea, the wilderness, and then a conquest. And that's how things are understood, and that's how things are explained by Paul. That's how he. There's no other context. There's no other context for Jesus than the Exodus, and the deeper meaning, the real Exodus, the new Exodus, and how we might think of it. Anything else about Simeon and Anna?
I think it's important to realize that it says she did not depart from the temple, but served God with fastings and prayers night and day. Mm-hmm. So that's pretty good for an 84-year-old woman.
Yes, she was faithful, dedicated, and they both represent great examples of kind of dedicated service and trust in God.
Do you think there's any significance to calling out that she's from the tribe of Asher? That's not a random detail to throw in there, but
I don't know.
So that Luke was a man of detail.
Yeah, and
well, you think Asher was one of the tribes of Israel, not Judah, and so they had gone, they had been carried off. So she was actually of Asher. I mean, I don't know. Tracing that back, when most of the Israelites who came back ended up being Samaritans. I don't know. That's an interesting detail to me because of that.
Yeah, that's good. Good question. Yeah, to make you go. But you are right. I mean, And it is true of anything you read in the scripture, the details are important, and it's not a random thing. Anything else? All right. Moving right along. So, Jesus goes missing. Jesus goes missing. This is not about losing your kids at the grocery store, which is often how it's related. There's something to this. Again, what is Luke trying to tell us? What is Luke trying to tell us? Why would he record this? Because there would have been any number of stories that could have been recorded out of the childhood of Jesus, right? Every parent knows that. There's just countless numbers of stories you can tell about your children. But this is the one that is prominently mentioned here. So in chapter 2, find my place. Verse 41. Now his parents went to Jerusalem every year at the feast of Passover. And when he was 12 years old, he went up according to custom. And when the feast was ended and they were returning, the boy Jesus stayed behind in Jerusalem. His parents did not know it, but supposing him to be in the group, they went a day's journey. When they began to search for him among their relatives and acquaintances, and when they did not find him, they returned to Jerusalem searching for him. For 3 days, they found him after 3 days, they found him in the temple, sitting among the teachers, listening to them and asking them questions. And all who heard him were amazed at his understanding and his answers. And when his parents saw him, they were astonished. And his mother said to him, "Son, why have you treated us so? Behold, your father and I have been searching for you in great distress." And he said to them, "Were you looking for me? Did you not know that I must be in my Father's house?" And they did not understand the saying that he spoke to them. And he went down with them and came to Nazareth and was submissive to them. And his mother treasured up all these things in her heart. And Jesus increased in wisdom and stature and in favor with God and man. So, he goes missing. One of the things you get a sense of, perhaps, is how the people traveled, that sort of thing. There's a big group. You can imagine that probably all hometown, they're going to travel together back to Jerusalem. Traveling is difficult, dangerous in the ancient world, and so you're not going to. I mean, you can travel by yourself if you want, but that's not what happens. And you get a sense of that. There's other family, there's other people from the town that they're traveling with, and it's just in that group that he's missing at 12. So they realize that he's gone, and understandably, I mean, you're panicked. Where is he? And so they find him eventually. They go back to Jerusalem. They find him at the temple. And why were you looking for me? Is Jesus' response. Why were you looking for me? Maybe that's the way a kid would respond to their parents under the circumstances. I don't know. But what is significant, of course, is that there's a deep understanding that this boy has that must keep his mom and dad up at night. It's got to keep him up at night. Of course, Mary is the one who's stressed here, and we've talked about Mary already. That Luke has probably interviewed Mary. Luke is an eyewitness account that Luke he's researched, he's done the interviews, and he's putting this all together. And this is an event. If that's the case, then this is an event that prominently stands out in her mind about just a pivotal moment. And if she's recounting this to Luke, now she's able to understand things in a much fuller picture. She now knows who her son is, and now she knows what Gabriel was talking about. Now she knows what Anna and Simeon were getting. She knows the meaning of things in ways at the time she didn't and she couldn't have. So she just treasures these things. What does this mean? I mean, other translations, you make the point about it. He's doing his father's work. He's about his father's business, I think is the way King James renders it. And Joseph was a carpenter, whatever a carpenter was, probably a stonemason. So was he, in there trying to find new clients for Joseph? Is that what he was doing?
No.
No.
What he was basically relying on was what he's known all the time. Coming from the Father, realizing God has a plan to save us. He's following that plan.
Mm-hmm.
That's the reason why I think he made the statement. Why are you looking for me? I've been sent here for a purpose.
Mm-hmm.
I got to serve that purpose. You should have known this is where I was.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
Before he was sent here, God had already had a plan for us. He already knew he was coming here to save us. Why are you looking for yourself?
Mm-hmm.
It was the whole purpose of me being sent here.
Yeah.
I think he also knew the priorities of that he had to. I think you're seeing him prioritize the right things, and that's why he's there. Because he's asking questions and he's learning and stuff. He's trying to grow in knowledge, which it says under 52. Knowledge, wisdom, stature. He's there. He's prioritized the right things, and he's there asking questions and learning. I don't think he has all the answers and stuff out there, but I think he's still trying to learn and get knowledge. But he's prioritized the right things. He's where he knows where he needs to be, like he said. He's still there learning, asking the right questions.
Yeah. Yeah.
So I think the form of his answers to his mom is where I'm supposed to be. And where are you looking for me? That's where I prioritize the right things. His mom wasn't thinking that.
Yeah, and it could very well be that, maybe he felt more comfortable there than he did at home. When you think about what the temple was and who his father is, and that's the genealogy we're going to get to here shortly. Good, Brian.
Back up, what Dave was saying, so I was puzzled about that. It says they went on a day's journey, and then they spent 3 days trying to find him. Like David said, they didn't go to the temple first. Obviously they did. And so, that kind of shows that they were not fully understanding that.
Yeah.
And because I thought it was odd that they spent 3 days.
Yeah. Well,
Maybe two. One was a travel day back.
Okay,
Yeah.
okay.
You
2 days?
gotta come back.
yeah. But whatever the details are of this explanation, he knows who he is and why he's come. And it's the first indication that we get as readers of him expressing that he has a purpose here. Joe?
Like you had said before, though, being human, knowing that he was the Son of God, right? Just kind of
Mm-hmm.
put that in perspective where Mary and Joseph also knew that this is the first time Jesus is acting or demonstrating or putting forth an effort to do that. So, again, I think that's the first recorded time that we've seen that, as the child growing up. Because, we skipped 12 years there, right? He was 40 days in the few verses before, and now he's 12 years old. So
Yeah.
this is the first kind of recorded time that he's demonstrating, yes, I'm human, but I am the Son of God.
Mm-hmm. Yep. That's a good connection. So the 3 days has got to be significant, right? This is the first he'd go missing for 3 days, but not the last. If you start, making connections like this, the text becomes even more meaningful. Simeon said some pretty distressing things to Mary. Another instance where she treasures things up in her heart. There is a pain that he tells her she's going to experience. A pain. What's that? You know, as readers, we say, oh, we know what that is. This child's going to die for the sins of the world. And we're, grateful for it. But, that's his mother. That's his mother. And so here I think it is significant that there's 3 days. I think if you put all of the travel time together, there's 5. It's 5 days. But Luke makes the point about 3 because that's the point at which she knows he's gone and she starts to experience pain, anxiety. I don't know where my boy is. Firstborn son. We can relate to that. Right? And so, yes, absolutely. And so, for 3 days, we say that's going to happen again. It's interesting when she finds him. He says, "I'm doing my Father's work," which is precisely what he was doing. What he's going to do later when he's dead. He uses that idea of work often in his ministry. He certainly, at the end of his life, it's, "I finished the work. I've finished everything you gave me to do." And so he dies in the hope that God's going to glorify him. His Father's going to raise him from death. That's the work, right? That's the work. That's his Father's business. His Father's business is the salvation of humans. And it's going to be accomplished through Jesus' death and subsequent resurrection. If you read it like that, you say, well, is Luke hinting at something? Never underestimate these writers. They have things in mind. These are carefully crafted documents, and as we've already pointed out, the details are not arbitrary. So this is this brief window early on in his life, flashing into the future about what's to come. Anything you'd like to mention, add to that?
I would like to add this to that. When we read verse 40, when it says that the child grew and waxed strong in spirit, filled with wisdom and grace of God, we have to keep in mind, who taught God? Nobody. This child was growing in wisdom and knowledge from his father. Proved that day when he was talking to the elders. What did they say? How does this child know this?
Yeah.
He's not of age. He was teaching them things that they had never heard of.
Mm-hmm.
Being that he is the child of God, there was things that he knew that they didn't even know. Now, I would take this scripture say when he was growing into the knowledge of his father is constantly teaching him. Keeping in mind, I realize you're a child. I'm going to allow you to grow and continue to feed you knowledge. Because he wasn't getting wisdom from mankind.
Mm-hmm.
They didn't even have the wisdom he had.
Yeah, I have a lot of questions about all of that. I remember teaching this once, and one of the deacons, he was asking about that text, and he says, "What you're saying is Jesus wasn't like my boys at home." No, he was not like his boys are like my boys, for that matter. Now that text can just be showing us a progression of how he just makes progress, and as he's getting ready to embark on the big part of his work, his ministry. All right, well, we'll stop here and pick up on Wednesday. Thank you.
Okay.
No, I don't, yeah, it's always been in more information. Yeah, always perplexing.
Look at like football and picture. Looking good, man. Sweater day. I like it.
Oh, here we go.
Thank you.